welcome you all to the valedictory ceremony of the first ever Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue 2022. The theme for this conference was transnational terrorism in the 21st century and the global counter-terrorism response.
On the behalf of Usanas Foundation, I would like to welcome all of you. I would like to welcome our Honorable Chief Guest, Shri Tejendra Khanna Sahab, President UCCI, Hansraj Chaudhary Sahab, Professor Sarang Devol Sahab, Professor Chandrasekhar Sahab, Sumtilal Ji Bohra Sahab, Ambassador Jyoti Pandya Sahab, and all the esteemed guests. Thank you so much for coming. To begin with, I would really like to thank all our sponsors, which includes Ministry of External Affairs, Think Tank Indian Council of World Affairs, MMCF Maharana of Mewar Foundation, Maharana of Mewar Charitable Foundation, IVA Group Delhi, UPSC Lounge, and Manipal Global Education Services. Usanas Foundation, we started this think tank almost a year and a half back during the peak days of Corona. It was a privilege because we started working online. Normally to run a think tank, you need big sponsors and big supporters. But during the Corona time, we were leveled with the bigger players in this field. And we started with the unique idea of engaging an international community from a small city. Most of the international relations discourse, the security discourse, is confined to the national capital of Delhi. That's why we get to hear views in the foreign policy, which are confined, or I would say, they are framed in a very narrow parameter. And the other parts of India, which have rich traditions in chivalry, diplomacy and statesmanship, they hardly get any representation. The current Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, and National Security Advisor, Shri Ajit Doval Sahab, always had a vision to take the national security discourse out of Delhi. With this vision, and by God's grace, by the grace of Shri Eklingnath Ji and my Sadguru, I started Usanas Foundation after having served for 4 years in Kashmir. Initially as a security advisor to the Honorable Governor during the abrogation of Article 370, and later working as the head of a project on terror financing. At Usanas Foundation, we did one of our biggest events over the last week, and that was Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. Americans withdrew from Afghanistan very recently, and then it has unleashed the Pandora's box of all the barbaric terrorist forces back. It seems highly likely that South Asia is going to become the jihadist hub of the world once again, thanks and courtesy to our adversarial neighbor Pakistan, which could easily effect a clean sweep in Afghanistan after the American withdrawal. Usanas Foundation organized the first mega conference, a mega global dialogue on terrorism, because we had our own concerns. Until recently, most of the discourse on terrorism was organized by Western think tanks and the Western intellectual centers. However, the fact is that India has been the victim of terrorist violence over the last 3 decades, but we could not produce much literature. A plethora of reasons are responsible for that. Most of our academic institutions are dominated by researchers who have ulterior political motivations. Besides that, it's very difficult to conduct a field research in the conflict area. However, I got a rare opportunity of working in Kashmir and thought of this idea to have a think tank which works on terrorism. So over the last 5 to 6 days, we organized this conference, and 25 world's best counter-terrorism experts joined from the 10 countries. And it was a rare privilege, a proud moment for Mewar and for me as well, when I saw big names in the Western counter-terrorism world, including advisors to the prime ministers and presidents, speaking under the banner of Maharana Pratap. I guess the life and legacy of Maharana Pratap is all about chivalry, diplomacy, statesmanship, tolerance, and innovation. However, we need to take that beyond Mewar to an international stage. We talk a lot about Maharana Pratap, but we need to ask the question, what have we ultimately done? I must congratulate Professor Chandrasekhar Sharma. He is sitting with us today. He has done a groundbreaking research on the Battle of Haldighati. He will enlighten you in a few moments. So here, the whole idea of naming this conference after Maharana Pratap was to project this tradition, this glorious name at an international level. Now I'll just briefly discuss the 4 foundational pillars of Usanas Foundation. We want to integrate India's corporate world with the national security discourse. Let me say it very explicitly that in 21st century, the threats are going to be diversified and hybrid in nature. A country's comprehensive national power is constituted very firmly by its economic power. So your adversaries are not just sitting you to attack you on your borders. They are sitting to disrupt your social harmony, your cyber infrastructure. This is a very new kind of warfare, 5th or 4th generation warfare. Then you have information warfare. They're there to change your minds, and that's what has taken place in India over the last 5 to 6 decades. Our history has been distorted. National has discredited. And invaders and barbarians who looted India, who unleashed atrocities here, demolished places of religious worship, and started the tradition of intolerance and brutality. They have been worshipped. So one aim of Usanas Foundation is to integrate the corporate sector with the national security, because they must realize, the corporate world, that the threats are also going to impact them. And the corporate sector constitutes a very strong backbone of country's national security. They can contribute by supporting think tanks. They can contribute by working on, researching on innovation in defense technologies and defense production. Turkey today happens to be the world's superpower in drone technology. It's a small country. Why can't we do it? We are a nation of 130 crores. A large number of institutions of technology sprawling across the length and breadth of the country. What are we doing here? Simply sending our engineers and managers to foreign nations to serve as bureaucrats in big companies? That's not a bad thing to do. Certainly everyone has a right to make a good career, but then your nation comes first. And we can do a lot better in innovation. We have a very creative mind and a very innovative mind. Secondly, Usanas Foundation's aim is to bring the traditional wisdom of the spiritual wisdom of India into the mainstream, and bring that, make it a part of India's intellectual, the mainstream academic curriculum. For example, Professor Sharma just mentioned about Vishwa Vallabh, the great text on agriculture, to me. The text has amazing discussions on agricultural technologies, innovation, organic farming. But I would just like to ask any agricultural economist of this country, teaching in some of the very prestigious institutions, do they know about Vishwa Vallabh? I guess most of them do not. However, many foreign nations are researching on that. Likewise, in the field of international relations, we have Shukra Niti, which is a great text on statecraft and diplomacy. But we are mostly busy. We have so far studied the theories of realism, liberalism, post-constructivism, enunciated by great Western scholars. They are absolutely great. But India has a lot to offer in terms of traditional wisdom. Gita is such a great text which can guide you, which can enlighten you in the field of governance, statecraft, management, that needs to be brought into the mainstream. Another text, Niti Shatak by Bharathari. There are 3 texts by Bharathari: Niti Shatak, Shringar Shatak, and Vairagya Shatak. When Bhartri was a king, he wrote Niti Shatak. It's a brilliant text on statecraft and diplomacy. When he renounced the world, he wrote Vairagya Shatak. When he was into the worldly pleasures, he wrote Shringar Shatak. I think our diplomats need to know about Niti Shatak, Shukra Niti, Mahabharata. Then only we can put our views firmly across the world. Otherwise, we will continue to be guided and influenced by global narratives in the name of intellectual discourses, human rights campaigns, which are nothing more than but the proxies of the global intelligence agencies. Many terrorist groups of India visit Western countries and become famous, eminent human rights activists. We are not able to counter because we don't think about them. We need to go back to our originals. Third aim is to find a very realistic viewpoint on foreign policy. Our foreign policy has mostly been guided by a very moralistic viewpoint, which is perfectly fine. But then, as our etiology, our epistemology in India motivates us to take a very realistic viewpoint, analyzing all aspects of a problem and think in the national interest. So we have to have a very realistic decision making in foreign policy. With this, I just rest my case. Most of the time, they were being very friendly with the Pakistan, and it was Pakistan which was taking billions and billions of dollars from Americans and funding Taliban. So the entire war on terror effort went to waste. After the Americans withdrew, it didn't take Pakistan even a few days to bring back Taliban into power. That was one of the biggest mistakes. Then, the second aspect, counter-terrorism policymakers have focused on tackling the terrorist organizations. When it comes to terror financing, we focused more on the formal channels of terror financing. That is the international trade and the formal banking system, by improving their transaction records and KYC documentation and all. But the terrorist organizations shifted to the informal methods of terror financing, which includes hawala. Osama bin Laden once famously said that I know the world of global finance just like my palm. I know it goddamn well, and I can easily manipulate it. That's what he did. More we became advanced in technological domains, further backward they went, the terror groups. Likewise, we also did not care much about the radicalizing organizations. When a terrorist organization operates, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It always has a background. There is a system. There are groups with a particular ideology operating and hiding in a plain sight, like Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir. It's an organization which functions in a purely legal manner. In Kerala, we have Popular Front of India, which has existed for last more than 5 decades. It has relationships with the politicians, community members, administration, everywhere. And they are able to penetrate their members in the state institutions, including the administration, the government, the politics. And that's how they create an overall environment for terrorist organizations to operate. This is what happened in Kashmir over the last 50 years under the patronage of the Article 370. Pakistan penetrated almost all the institutions of the state, which includes academia. Jamaat-e-Islami was able to penetrate the state education system with its teachers and with its professors through the Rahbar Talim scheme. They penetrated the state financial system, that is the Jammu and Kashmir Bank. They penetrated the state political system, the government system, the administration system. These days government is acting very hard against them. But it will be very shocking if I tell you that the sons and daughters of Sayyid Salahuddin, the chief of Hizbul Mujahideen, were working in the state government. Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a hardcore terrorist organization funded and financed by Pakistan, was able to infiltrate the state education system in a very crazy manner. There is a very famous case of Professor Rafiq Butt. He was teaching in Srinagar University. He was a professor of sociology, teaching all kinds of theories of Kant and famous sociologists, other sociologists to the students. One fine day he became a terrorist. Later, I was talking to the investigating officer of that case and he told me that he was teaching Maulana Maududi's ideology of political Islam, which basically says that the people from the other communities, it's a very radical school of Islam. Normally Islam has various strains like Sufism, which is more prevalent in India, which is tolerant, which is liberal. As Chandrasekhar Sharma Sahab also mentioned a while back, that there was a tradition of hiring people from the minority community in Mewar. But then there are certain ideologies which have originated in the West Asia, like Wahhabism, which are trying to infiltrate Indian political and social scenario. So he was following that ideology. And that's how the entire state apparatus had become a pawn in the hands of Pakistan, which is why it was absolutely essential to abrogate Article 370. And for that, we must congratulate this government that finally they made something irrelevant which had become the main cause of the problem. Famous interlocutor, Mr. Dineshwar Sharma, who is the former chief of IB, he said that if we don't save Kashmir now, it will become another Syria. It was on the verge of that. If you see the pictures of 3-4 years back, you find young students indulging in stone pelting and all kinds of radicalization activities, which gives a very dark picture. But now after the abrogation of Article 370, if you see, a lot of investment is coming to Kashmir. It is becoming the part of mainstream India. What we need more now is good governance and reaching out to the people in Kashmir. Third part, which we discussed in our conference, was that this terrorism challenge is going to be very grave in the future because of the revival of Taliban in Afghanistan. Terrorist organizations like Jaish-e-Mohammed believe in the same ideology in which Taliban believes. And one of our eminent speaker, Rohan Gunratna, who is the current advisor to the President of Sri Lanka, he said that it's not just a revival of Taliban, but it's a revival of Taliban plus Al-Qaeda. And as I recently mentioned, that Jaish-e-Mohammed believes in the same extremist ideology in which Taliban believes. And Jaish-e-Mohammed is the same organization which orchestrated the dastardly attack of Pulwama, in which 40 Indian soldiers martyred, which attacked the parliament. This organization has an expertise in developing suicide bombers. And with the revival of Taliban, Pakistan will shift all the terror training camps to Afghanistan. And they will say that we are not involved in terrorism because Afghanistan is an independent country. But we all know that it is Pakistan which is controlling Taliban in Afghanistan. That way, in the international bodies like United Nations, FATF and UNCTITF, that is United Nations Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, Pakistan will get a clean sweep. Because it will say that we are not responsible, it is from the Afghanistan from where these terror groups are operating. And it seems all likely that Jaish will be trying to expand in the other parts of India. Likewise, we also feel the tremors of Khalistan movement resurfacing in Punjab. Some of the recent incidents, for example, the dropping of weapons by drones on the Punjab border, and various recent incidents in the recent past also. In 2015, several leaders from a political party were killed in Punjab by Khalistani terrorist groups. This is all a sign of people trying to revive that. And let me tell you, in America, there is this movement called Sikhs for Justice Referendum 2020, which is being organized by those Khalistani leaders who migrated to America and Canada. And they have tied up with Pakistan, Pakistan's ISI, and other enemies of India. Some of those settled in Turkey have also joined them. And they are trying to create a major information warfare against India at the global level. So these things are going to be very serious in the future. And we need to revive and we need to completely overhaul our state intelligence apparatus. If you go to Jammu and Kashmir and look at their state police organization's performance, you will find that it is extraordinary. Even a small constable in Jammu and Kashmir police has a very fine understanding of these various terror groups operating there. He would be able to tell you the difference between Jamaat-e-Islami, Ahl-e-Hadith, Barelvi, Deobandi. Whereas in the other states of India, you come across very senior officials who don't understand these nuances. I don't blame them because they have not faced such situations in the past. But in the future, certainly things will be dark. Therefore, we need to completely revolutionize, reform our state intelligence services. Thank you.